They say you can't grow anything out of bitterness, but I disagree. I was 59 years old when they came for me. My hair had long since lost its battle with the gray, but my hands were still strong, calloused from years of working the land my father left me. The sun and wind had carved my face like the bark of the sycamore tree out by the pond. I was not glamorous, and I never tried to be. My name is Loretta May Whitlock, and my farm, my family's farm, sat on the red clay edge of South Carolina like an old mule too stubborn to die. The papers called me unwell. My nephew called me confused. And the court? Well, the court called me incompetent. That was the day they forced me into assisted living. It wasn't sudden. Oh no, it was a slow erosion, like watching termites eat the inside of your walls until one day the whole house collapses. I started getting these letters, official-looking ones with government stamps. Then came the visits, a social worker, then another. A doctor who asked questions like I was 6 years old. "What day is it, Miss Whitlock?" she'd ask. "The day you stop pretending I'm stupid," I'd reply. But they didn't stop. They kept coming. Every answer I gave, every word I spoke, was twisted into something pitiful, something broken. They painted a picture of a lonely widow unable to care for herself. Never mind the fact that I still ran the tractor, still milked the goats, still canned my own damn tomatoes. They didn't see a woman. They saw a liability. And the reason? My land, Whitlock Acres. 200 acres of fertile, inheritance-protected land that had somehow escaped the claws of developers all these years. I'd refused every offer, every trick. My family fought and died for that land, and I wasn't about to sell it to build a golf course. My nephew Clark, the only blood relative left, God help me, was salivating. He'd moved to Charlotte years ago and thought anyone who lived off a farm was either a hick or a fool. He came around only when he wanted something, and the last time he visited, I caught him measuring the living room with his eyes. He didn't ask about me. He asked about the deed, so he sued me. Said I was unfit, said I had dementia, brought a psychiatrist I'd never met into court to testify. And despite my protests, my records, my neighbors writing letters on my behalf, the judge agreed. Said I needed to be placed in assisted living, for my own safety. They called it Magnolia Rest. The name sounded sweet enough, but it was a prison. Beige walls, rooms like hotel closets, and the smell, like Lysol had gotten into a fight with death and neither one was winning. They took my phone, said it was too advanced, took my boots, said they weren't appropriate indoor wear. I wore slippers and silence, but not for long, because I had a plan. They thought they broke me, but they just made me quiet. And quiet women, we think, we listen, we bide our time. I knew every inch of that facility by the end of my second week. I learned the nurses' shifts, the backdoor codes, even where they hid the real coffee. I made friends, some of the best kind, invisible women who the world had discarded. There was Midge, who once ran a bakery in Charleston before her kids locked her up, and Rose, a former librarian who could still recite Shakespeare when she wasn't playing dumb. Together, we plotted. I started writing letters in secret, hiding them in the lining of my pillowcase. Midge smuggled them out when her granddaughter visited, each one addressed to an old friend, a neighbor, or someone I knew owed me a favor. I didn't ask for pity, I asked for access, because I was going back. They might have taken my home, but they couldn't take what I knew. I remembered every planting row, every irrigation trench, every shed. I remembered the fallow patch out by the orchard that no one ever cared for. And I remembered a secret. A packet of seeds gifted by an old botanist friend, labeled only, "Try these when they try you." The night I escaped, it was raining. Midge faked a fall in the common area. Alarms blared, nurses scrambled. I slipped through the service hallway in scrubs, stole a raincoat, and walked right out the back like a ghost. No one saw me. No one believed I could do it. And just like that, I was home. The farm was still there, but not untouched. The developers had already marked the land. Spray-painted stakes pierced the soil like spears in a sleeping beast. The barn had been emptied, the porch stripped of my chairs. Clark had moved fast. But he hadn't touched the orchard. And that, my friends, was his mistake. I started with the fallow ground, dug deep into the red earth, burying each seed like a promise. I didn't know what they would become, only that I trusted the man who gave them to me. I watered them by hand, fed them with compost, guarded them from animals. And every night I slept in the loft of the barn with a shotgun and a dog I picked up along the road. I named her Widow. The first sprout came in 3 days. It was unlike anything I'd seen. Thick-stemmed, leafed like tobacco, but glimmered with a silver sheen in the moonlight. And it grew fast. Too fast. By the end of the week, it stood waist-high. By 2 weeks, it dwarfed me. Then the flowers came. They pulsed with a deep purple hue, opening only at night. The scent was intoxicating, sweet and strange. Bees flocked to them. So did rumors. Neighbors began to talk. Then bloggers. Then scientists. I didn't answer questions. I just harvested. And what I grew? It changed everything. It was labeled as a supercrop. More nutrient-dense than kale. Faster growing than corn, immune to drought. They called it a miracle. I called it revenge. Because with every dollar it made, I bought back what they took. I bought the lawyers who argued against me. I bought the judge's summer home. And I bought Magnolia Rest. Now it's a sanctuary. For women like me, but that's not where my story ends. Because one night, I caught Clark sneaking into the orchard. And he wasn't alone. I watched them from the shadows. The moon was nothing but a sliver in the sky, veiled by clouds, but I could still make out the outline of my nephew's hunched posture and the flicker of his phone screen as he recorded my crop. His friend, some slick-haired man in a suit far too fine for the mud he stood in, held a plastic bag and a pair of shears. They thought they were being clever. They thought I was asleep. But I never sleep deep on nights like that. Widow was already growling low, her body taut like a drawn bow beside me in the barn's loft. I kept my hand on the stock of the shotgun, my breath measured, and waited. Clark leaned in closer to the plants, whispering something to the suit. The man chuckled softly and plucked one of the violet blossoms, dropping it into the bag with a little reverence, like he knew its value. He didn't know how close he was to losing the hand that picked it. I didn't move yet. Not until I heard the word that made my blood run cold. Patent. That smug little word told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just curious. They were planning to steal the genetic profile, pass it off as theirs, and lock me out of my own miracle. A scheme wrapped in lawsuits and glossy lab coats. My boots hit the dirt before Clark could snip another stem. I stepped into the beam of their phone's flashlight. The sudden shock in their eyes, especially Clark's, was more satisfying than it should have been. He dropped the shears, fumbling backward into the mud. "Loretta?" he gasped. "You're... how the hell?" "Alive," I said flatly, cocking the shotgun without raising it, "and still the legal owner of this land until proven otherwise. Which means I've got every right to protect my property." The suit straightened up, trying to posture. "You won't shoot." That's a mighty big bet for a man who doesn't know me. Clark held up his hands. "Auntie, let's just talk. You're clearly upset. Let's not do anything rash. You came onto my land at night with tools to take something that ain't yours. I'd say the rash thing was already done. Now get off my soil." They left, but not before I snapped a photo of them with my own phone. Their faces lit by the flash, eyes wide, caught like 2 raccoons in a trash bin. They didn't speak another word, but I knew they wouldn't stop there. Within a week, the lawsuits started again. This time, they were slippery. Not trying to declare me incompetent. No. This time, they were claiming breach of zoning, environmental violations, and even a fictional clause about unregulated biogenetic cultivation. All paper bullets, but there were a lot of them. I fought back. I hired a real lawyer this time, one of the best in the state, and paid him handsomely with the early proceeds of my crop. His name was Gideon Shore, and if a shark and a southern preacher had a baby, it would be him. Silver-haired, silver-tongued, and utterly ruthless. He came out to the farm one morning in snakeskin boots and a linen suit, standing at the edge of the crop with a cigar hanging from his lips. "Damn fine plants," he said. "They smell like revenge and money." "They're both," I said. He turned to me, eyes narrow. "You ready for a fight, Miss Whitlock? 'Cause these boys ain't playing. They're scared. That's why they're coming hard. What you've got here is disruption in leaf form. Let 'em be scared. I was born for the dirt, Gideon. They just started playing in it." He grinned. "Then let's make them regret it." And we did. Each hearing, each motion, each counterclaim was met with ferocity. Gideon knew the law better than Clark, and his cronies knew their own names. He turned their zoning claims into a joke and uncovered their shady attempts to buy a patent on my plants behind my back. In one hearing, he read their emails aloud, where Clark called me a loony old hag, and the suit referred to the crop as the old woman's gold mine. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The judge's eyebrows raised. But even with the tide turning, something else stirred in me, something older than anger, fear. Because the plants had changed. Not just in size, though they had grown beyond anything natural, some reaching 10 feet tall, but in behavior. Yes, behavior. They moved. Not like vines or sunflowers. Not toward the light. No. At night, the leaves would tilt, curl slightly, as if listening. When I walked among them, they'd lean ever so gently in my direction. At first, I thought it was the wind or my imagination. But then I tested it. I brought Widow into the field one morning. She stopped halfway through, whimpered, and backed away. The next morning, I found a dead rabbit on the edge of the plot. It wasn't torn apart like prey. It was shriveled, as if the life had been drained. I burned it, but I didn't stop tending the crop. Call me foolish, call me obsessed, but I knew I was on the edge of something vast, and I wasn't turning back. Instead, I called an old friend. Dr. Nora Bellamy, a botanist from North Carolina I'd known since my 20s. She'd once cultivated hybrid fruits that won national acclaim, and she owed me a favor or two. She arrived in a beat-up Subaru with 3 coolers full of lab gear. "Loretta," she said, hugging me tight, "why do I feel like you're about to make me regret every professional decision I've ever made?" "Because I am." She studied the plants for 2 days without sleeping. Took samples. Ran tests. Her face grew tighter by the hour. Finally, she called me into the barn. "They're not just hybrids," she said, sliding a tablet toward me. "They've been altered. Genetically. Some of the DNA doesn't match anything in the known plant kingdom. I don't know what you planted, but it's not from around here." My breath caught. "Not from here? Not from Earth, Loretta. Or at least, not entirely. Maybe some experimental strand that leaked. Or maybe your old friend gave you something he didn't fully understand." I remembered the note on the packet. "Try these when they try you." Had he known? "What happens if someone eats it?" I asked. Nora hesitated. "I don't know. It's safe in low doses based on what I've seen, but the neurological markers. This isn't just nutrition. It could alter cognition, enhance perception, or worse, it's a Pandora's crop." We sat in silence for a long time. "I could help you destroy it," she offered softly. I shook my head. "Not yet. Let me think." That night I sat alone in the orchard, the leaves humming faintly in the dark. The air shimmered with the scent of the blossoms, and I felt strange. Like the plants were waiting, listening, and then a voice. Not from the plants, but from behind me. "You are always too stubborn for your own good." I turned and saw my dead husband standing at the edge of the crop. His boots were muddy. His smile was just like I remembered, crooked and tired, and his eyes glowed faintly in the dark. I didn't move. My breath caught somewhere between my throat and my chest, frozen like winter had landed inside me. My husband had been dead for 12 years. But there he stood, Wade Whitlock. Same denim jacket with the torn sleeve. Same scuffed boots that used to sit by our back door. Same tired smile, one corner always higher than the other. And those eyes, they glowed. Not brightly, not like a flashlight or anything alien in a movie, but faint, like a memory lit by candlelight. My first thought was that I'd lost my mind. That the pressure, the lawsuits, the plants, all of it, had finally cracked something inside me. But I wasn't afraid, and that scared me more than anything. Wade? He nodded. Am I dreaming? No. Then what are you? He stepped forward, into the moonlight. I saw the shimmer run across him like water over glass. He wasn't. Solid, not completely, like the air was folding around him, struggling to hold him together. I don't know, he said softly, but I know I had to come. The crop called me. I stood up, slowly, my knees stiff from the ground. Widow hadn't barked or growled. She sat behind me, ears down, but calm, watching him like she knew him. What does that mean? It means you're not dealing with a plant anymore, Loretta. You're dealing with a door. He walked among the tall stalks, running his ghostly fingers through the leaves. They bent gently toward him, like they knew him too. I followed. The scent grew stronger as we walked, rich, electric. The air itself buzzed faintly, like a field before a lightning strike. You always said I'd make something out of this land, I whispered. I just never expected it to be this. He chuckled. Neither did I. But it's bigger than the land now. What are you? I asked again, not out of fear this time, but from a need to understand. He turned to face me fully. I think I'm what you needed. Maybe that's all I am. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. No flash, no sound, just gone. The leaves stilled. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Nora was already in the orchard, measuring something with a handheld scanner. She looked up when I approached and froze. You okay? She asked. No, I said honestly. She nodded. Did you see anything? Unusual? I didn't answer. She must have seen it on my face because she didn't press. Instead, she handed me the scanner. Look at this. I peered at the screen. A series of heat maps and electromagnetic spikes. Something inside the orchard was generating low-frequency waves. Pulsing, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. It's not coming from the plants themselves, she said. It's coming from the soil beneath them. My throat dried. I knew what was buried under that section of land. An old well, long sealed. The same place Wade had wanted to dig up years ago to expand the irrigation line. The same place he abandoned after the ground caved in on him one afternoon. We'd buried his ashes there. It's starting, Loretta, Nora said. Whatever you've grown. It's not just alive, it's aware. I nodded slowly. Then let's keep growing it. We spent the next week monitoring the crop day and night. Gideon kept the lawyers at bay, buying us time. Meanwhile, Nora discovered that under certain sound frequencies, especially those mimicking rainfall or thunder, the plants responded dramatically. They tilted, expanded their leaves, and in one case, even shifted their entire root base slightly. She called it responsive rooting. I called it unnatural, and yet I couldn't stop. Every instinct told me to harvest more, to build, to protect. So I did. We fenced the entire orchard with metal posts and installed infrared cameras. I hired 2 farmhands, old friends who didn't ask questions, just watched and worked. One of them, Lamar, had served in Afghanistan. The other, Jane, had done time for eco-activism. Both were loyal. By the end of the month, the crop had doubled. That's when the strangers came. Unmarked trucks on the main road. Men with binoculars camped in the woods. A drone that circled overhead until Nora shot it down with a pellet gun and a prayer. I started sleeping in shifts. One night I found Jane standing at the fence, staring at the plants. You hear it? She asked. What? She didn't turn, singing, like wind through a flute. But there's no wind. I stepped beside her and listened. She was right. A faint melody, almost sorrowful, like something ancient calling from deep in the soil. Not a trick of the ear. Nora later confirmed it was emitting from the plants themselves. A bioacoustic pattern unlike any she'd seen. They're trying to communicate, she said. To us? No, to each other. Or something else, I thought. The next day, the government showed up. Black SUVs. 2 men and a woman in dark suits. No badges, just sharp questions. They claimed to be from the Department of Agricultural Innovation, but they never showed ID. They asked about the crop, the soil, the visitors. They wanted samples. Nora refused. Then they asked about Clark. That made me pause. What about him? I asked. He's missing, the woman said. Last seen driving toward this area. We tracked his phone to a 5-mile radius of your property. Then nothing. I said nothing. Nora lied for me. They left, but not before placing a surveillance marker on the fence. Nora found it and fried it in a microwave. Later that evening, I found something else. At the edge of the orchard, half covered in leaves, was Clark's phone. The screen cracked, the battery dead, and next to it, an empty bag, the same kind he used to collect samples. The crop had taken him, or something had. I didn't tell anyone. Not even Nora. Instead, I sat in the barn that night, holding the dead phone and staring into the swaying field of flowers. The scent was stronger now, more pungent, almost medicinal. And again, that feeling, the sensation of being watched. The next morning, the first bloom appeared in a new section of the orchard. But this flower was different. It had a face. Not like a human face, not literal, but shaped like something that wanted to be seen, that wanted to be known. It looked like Wade. And beneath it, the soil pulsed faintly, beating with something older than time. I didn't speak for nearly an hour after I saw it. The flower didn't just resemble Wade, it knew him. The shape, the tilt, even the slight crook in the petals where his smile used to live. It was all there. That wasn't a coincidence. That was intention. I knelt beside it, too afraid to touch, but too mesmerized to look away. The wind didn't blow, but the stems swayed, like it was breathing. "Loretta," it whispered. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over my own boots. The word wasn't spoken out loud. Not really. It was like it had been pressed against my skull from the inside. A sound with no source. My heart hammered. Widow whined from the barn, pacing nervously. I wiped the sweat from my brow even though the morning was cool. I didn't tell Nora. Not yet. I needed time to process, to understand. I wasn't ready to hand over the one thread of mystery that still felt like it belonged to me. Instead, I did what I always did when fear clawed its way into my throat. I worked. I turned the compost, checked the water lines, took inventory of the new growth. Everything looked healthy. Too healthy. Even with my experience, I couldn't explain the rate of expansion. 20 more plants had matured in the last 48 hours, and I hadn't sown a single seed since the first batch. They were multiplying. And not just that. They were organizing. The new shoots appeared in spirals around the original stalks. Each circle tighter and more aligned, as if following a blueprint I couldn't see. Nora eventually noticed too. "This isn't random," she said, squinting at her drone footage. "This is design." Her voice was calm, but I could see the hairline crack forming in her composure. She was scared. We both were. That afternoon, we had our first break-in. Lamar found a set of footprints by the west fence. Heavy boots, military tread, no vehicle tracks nearby. Someone had parked outside the main road and hiked through the woods. He didn't take anything. Or if he did, we hadn't figured out what yet. We doubled the perimeter, mounted motion sensors, bought more dogs. We were ready for war, even if we didn't understand the enemy. But the real war was still brewing beneath our feet. Late one night, Nora woke me from my cot in the barn. "There's something moving underground," she said. "Come see." She led me to the southern edge of the orchard, flashlight held low. The soil looked normal until you stood close. Then you saw it. A subtle ripple in the earth. Like something massive shifting far below the surface. "It's not a mole or a tunnel collapse," she whispered. "It's too uniform. Too slow. What do you think it is?" She didn't answer. The next morning the ripples had stopped, but in their place a new ring of flowers had bloomed. These weren't purple. They were Podcax tauve, pure and pale and silent. No scent, no hum, just stillness. When Jane approached them, her nose started bleeding. Nora rushed her inside and ran tests. Blood pressure spike, brainwave anomalies. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to make her pass out. That night I stayed in the orchard alone. I sat between the white blossoms and the purple ones. The air between them was different, like two storms waiting to collide. "I don't know what you want," I whispered, "but I'm not giving up my land." And then I felt it. Not pain, not pressure, presence. Something enormous. Not physically, but spiritually. Like standing in the shadow of a cathedral built by ghosts. And then it spoke. "We remember you." I gasped, my hands trembling. It wasn't Wade's voice. It wasn't even a voice. It was a memory, dredged from my past and reshaped into words. It smelled like my mother's apron. Felt like the first winter after Wade died. Tasted like cold coffee and loss. "You're not him," I whispered. "We are not. What are you?" Seed. Root. Memory. Debt. The last word chilled me. Debt? But it was gone. The presence. The pulse. Everything faded, leaving only the whisper of wind through leaves. I stumbled back to the barn, heart racing, unable to sleep. Nora found me at dawn, pale and silent. "You saw something," she said. I nodded. "Was it Wade?" "No," I whispered. "But it knows him." She didn't push, just handed me a cup of black coffee and sat with me until the sun crept up over the fields. Later that day, Gideon called. "You're gonna want to see this," he said. He sent me a link to a news broadcast. A remote research lab in Utah had burned to the ground. They'd been working on synthetic crop accelerants and, quote, bioneural root systems. The fire wasn't an accident. The lead scientist had vanished, and his last known location? A short trip through South Carolina. Days ago. His name? Dr. Alan Keene. The man who gave me the seed packet 10 years ago. I didn't sleep that night either. Instead, I walked the orchard again. The white flowers were still blooming, the purple ones taller, the air thicker, and at the very center, the well. The sealed stone ring where Wade's ashes lay. The soil there had cracked slightly. And something was growing from the center. It wasn't a stalk. It was a hand. The hand was made of bark, or something like bark, twisted, gnarled, streaked with that same faint violet glow I'd seen in the petals. It pushed out of the cracked earth at the center of the well, like it had been clawing its way up from the other side of the world. 5 fingers, crooked and root-bound, curling slightly like it had just woken from a century-long sleep. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just stared, the weight of everything pressing down on me until I felt like part of the soil myself. Widow stood beside me, tense and still. Her ears perked, not with fear, but recognition. Like she'd smelled this before, like it was a part of us. When I reached down to touch it, just to asterisk no. The hand twitched. I jerked back so hard I fell on my side. The earth trembled, not a quake, a breath. Then came the voice. "This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. No, not that voice. Not human. It vibrated through the air, across the leaves, and into the marrow of my bones. It didn't say words. It unfolded them inside me. Like the story had already been written, and I was only now remembering my part. We are root. We are return. We are what was promised. I scrambled back, heart battering against my ribs like it wanted out of my body. The orchard darkened, though the sun still shone above us. The shadows grew long. Unnatural. They bent the wrong way. The hand withdrew. Slowly. Gracefully. Retreating into the soil like it had never been there at all. But it left something behind. A seed. Small. Black. Glimmering faintly like obsidian dusted in ash. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I just stared until Nora came running, her tablet in hand, calling my name. Loretta, you need to see. She stopped when she saw the well, the cracked earth, the spot where the hand had been. What happened? I just pointed. She bent, squinting at the seed, her mouth falling open. Is that from Metit? I nodded. I think it's a gift. Or a warning. We didn't move it. We built a wire cage around the site, marked it with reflective tape. But that night, when I checked again, the seed was gone. No signs of disturbance, just an empty spot where something had been and wasn't anymore. Jane swore she saw lights over the orchard around midnight. Lamar said he heard music coming from underground. And Widow? She howled. Once. Loud enough to shake the rafters. Then she slept for 2 days straight. By morning, every single white flower had vanished. Not wilted. Gone. In their place, holes. Shallow depressions in the earth. Perfectly circular. And inside them, more seeds. 72. I counted. We collected them one by one with gloved hands and steel tongs. Nora tested too. Both were dormant, but unstable, like live grenades filled with memory instead of shrapnel. What do you want to do? She asked. I stared across the orchard. The purple flowers swayed in perfect rhythm, like a choir waiting for its conductor. We plant them. Loretta, we plant them. Somewhere safe. Controlled. Somewhere we can watch. Asterisk. That's how the ring was born. A controlled zone outside the main field, fenced in with steel and monitored 24/7. We used grow lights, irrigation and soil samples curated from different parts of the country. A testing ground, a laboratory, a shrine. Within 3 days, 49 had sprouted. The rest never did. The ones that grew weren't the same. Their leaves shimmered in patterns. Their stems pulsed with slow rhythm. They didn't look like plants. They looked like instruments. And when the wind blew just right, they played themselves. Soft melodies. Strange chords. A harmony that made the hair on your arms stand up and your breath catch in your throat. The music wasn't pretty. It wasn't eerie. It was true. Like hearing your own death echoing from the future. It became clear what the seeds were. Not just life. Not just vengeance. Memory. Stored in root and stem and sound. When I stood in the center of the ring, I remembered things I had forgotten for decades. Wade's first letter. My mother's humming. The way my father used to whistle after a long day. It played in my mind as real as if it were happening again. And I wept. Because I finally understood what the crop was. It wasn't a weapon. It was truth, compressed into cells and fiber. A record of pain and love and debt and joy. And maybe, just maybe, something deeper. An arc. And that's when they came back. The government. This time with more trucks. More men. Helicopters. They didn't knock. They invaded. Jane held the gate for as long as she could. Lamar held them off with a shotgun. Nora tried to burn the test samples. But there were too many. too prepared. They didn't ask for permission. They took. They took the plants, the seeds, the soil, the cameras, the hard drives, and me. I woke up in a white room with no windows. My wrists were strapped, my voice hoarse. A mirror across from me that I knew was a camera. Then the door opened, and Clark walked in, alive, but not. His eyes glowed faintly violet, and when he spoke, it wasn't his voice anymore. You gave us root, now we bloom. His mouth moved, but it wasn't him talking. Clark, my greedy, arrogant, always calculating nephew, was gone. The body that stood before me wore his features like a borrowed suit, too tight in the shoulders and too loose in the soul. You gave us root. Now we bloom. It said it again, softer this time, like it expected me to understand. I didn't. I pulled at the straps on my wrists. Tight. Plastic and unforgiving. My fingers tingled from the pressure. The room smelled sterile, antiseptic, artificial, but Clark, or the Prestake-using Clark, smelled like home, like fresh rain and turned soil and wood smoke, the scent of spring after a harsh winter. You're not him, I rasped. No. But we are many, and he offered himself freely. I shook my head. Clark doesn't do anything freely. He doesn't give, he takes. The Clark thing tilted its head as if amused. Then he is still with us. His desire seated our reach. His hunger opened the gate. I stared. Gate? It stepped closer. I could see now. Its pupils were no longer human. They'd fractaled into rings, organic, ever-shifting, like a kaleidoscope of roots spiraling into darkness. We are inheritance. You grew us in pain, in defiance, in need. And we remembered. Remembered what? The agreement. My mouth went dry. What agreement? But it didn't answer. Instead, it reached out and placed something on the table between us. A vial. Small. Cylindrical. Filled with black liquid that shimmered violet under the lights. Drink, it said, and you will see. I laughed, cracked and hoarse. What kind of fool do you think I am? It didn't blink, didn't flinch, just waited. I stared at the vial. Something inside it pulsed, like it breathed. I could almost hear it, like a whisper beneath glass. I didn't drink, but I didn't knock it away either. The door opened again. This time Nora entered. 2 guards flanked her. Her eyes were wild, her blouse stained with dirt and ash. But she was alive. Thank God. Loretta, she gasped, her voice cracking. They've taken everything. The ring, the orchard, the tests. They've moved it all underground. I don't know where. The Clark thing turned to her, then looked back at me. It was never yours to keep. We were waiting for soil deep enough to dream. Nora stepped between us. You're not him. You're not him? Then what are you? She demanded. It smiled, a crooked echo of Clark's smirk. The bloom of memory, the seed of recompense. I couldn't take it anymore. What do you want from me? I shouted. Why me? Why this land? Why now? It leaned in, eyes burning. Because you never forgot us. Because your grief fed the ground. Because you planted defiance, and it grew. The guards grabbed Nora, dragged her away. She screamed my name until the door sealed behind her. And then it was just me and the thing that wore my nephew's skin. It placed one hand on my shoulder, and for one moment, I saw everything, not with my eyes, with my mind, a history too old for bones. A world buried beneath ours, not in distance but in frequency. A memory so vast it had to be rooted in living things to survive. A consciousness that once blanketed the planet before language, before tools, before man. It had been forgotten. But not gone. We had covered it in concrete, poisoned its rivers, starved its soil, cut down its messengers and paved over its veins. But it had waited. Deep. Patient. And then I had planted it again. With love. With rage. With hope. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer strapped down. The room was gone. I stood in the orchard again, but not the one from my land. This one stretched endlessly. Trees and flowers from every climate blooming together. Fractals of light danced between stalks that bent in prayer. Wade stood at the center, whole, alive. He smiled. Not the tired, crooked smile I remembered, but one of peace, completion. "Loretta," he said. I ran to him. We embraced. And then I woke up in my bed. At home. The barn was quiet. Widow at my feet. The orchard outside. The purple flowers swaying gently in the dawn wind. I stumbled outside, unsure if I had dreamed it all. But on the table by the porch, the vial still sat full, untouched. And beside it, a note in Clark's handwriting. "Thank you. We remember." Nora emerged from the barn minutes later. Alive. Shaken. We didn't talk much that morning, just drank coffee, watched the sunrise. Later that day, a man in a truck arrived, unmarked. He delivered 2 boxes, sealed, stamped with a strange symbol I'd seen burned into the bark of one of the new trees. Inside, seeds. Thousands of them, not like the others. These shimmered in every color, and they pulsed, like little hearts made of light. A note was taped to the inside lid, for others, when they're ready. And that's when I knew this wasn't just my story anymore. It never had been. I was just the first garden. Now there were going to be many. I didn't plant the new seeds immediately. I stared at them for days. They sat in the center of my kitchen table, glowing faintly like coals that never cooled. Sometimes I'd hear a sound, soft and low, like a heartbeat not coming from my own chest. Nora wouldn't touch them. Lamar wouldn't come inside the house at all. Even Widow avoided the room. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I'd been chosen. Or maybe I'd chosen them. Either way, the exchange had already happened. The bloom was inside me now. I could feel it in my fingertips, in the way my dreams had shifted. I no longer saw memories. I relived them. Woke up crying, laughing, screaming. Sometimes I didn't know who I was until I touched the earth again. The seeds wanted to grow. I just didn't know where. I wasn't about to scatter them like confetti across land I didn't understand. These weren't tomatoes or sunflowers. These were ideas. Living, breathing, hungry for a place that would listen. So I waited. Until the first letter came. It was handwritten. The ink smudged from travel. No return address. Just 2 words on the envelope. "You remembered?" Inside? A story. 4 pages long. Neat cursive. A woman from Arkansas who had heard a song in her dreams for 3 straight months. She described a melody identical to what we heard in the ring. She drew the flowers, near perfect. And she asked for one thing. A seed. I sat with that letter all night, read it again and again. Every sentence dripped with sincerity, confusion, yearning. She wasn't some opportunist. She was calling out in the dark, and something inside her was calling back. So I mailed her 3 seeds, wrapped in wax paper, sealed in a glass tube. I didn't include a return address either. Just a symbol burned into the cork, same as the one on the box that arrived with them. And once I did that, the flood began. Letters arrived daily. Some were scrawled in panic, others in beautiful detail. Farmers, widows, veterans, children. They'd seen things, heard things, dreamed of orchards that whispered. They were all being called, and I was the keeper of the call. Nora helped me build the catalog. Lamar coordinated safe drops. Jane vetted the requests. One by one, the seeds found new homes. We never heard back from most. But the ones who G'd right back? The stories they told would stop your heart. A blind girl in Missouri who planted her seed in a church courtyard and swore she could now see in dreams. Light, shape, sound. Not the world as it was, but as it could be. A man in Wales who buried a seed beside his wife's ashes, only to find a bloom that mimicked her humming on Sunday mornings. A former soldier in Idaho who claimed the plant led him to an unmarked grave near his childhood home, the remains of a missing girl from 40 years ago. The plants were remembering for us, healing us, guiding us, and perhaps preparing us, because change was coming. Fast. The government had gone quiet. But that wasn't comfort. That was planning. They didn't just want to control the crop. They wanted to control the story. The narrative. We caught wind of a black site operation repurposing the plants, modifying them to control behavior. They'd injected the root systems with synthetic hormones, cloaked the resonance patterns with EM interference. The result? Dead zones. Places where the earth went quiet. Birds stopped singing. Rain refused to fall. Fields of withered stalks that had once danced with memory now stood like tombstones. They were killing the memory. One bloom at a time. I had to act. So I created the Bloom Network, decentralized, anonymous, volunteers across the globe. We taught people how to grow safely, how to listen, how to document without detection. It wasn't just seeds anymore, it was resistance. By the 6th month, we had over 200 active nodes. Small gardens, balconies, rooftops, forests, each one a signal flare. And then I got the letter I didn't expect, from Magnolia Rest, the same place they'd locked me in. A nurse had found an old woman humming in her sleep, humming the same tune from our orchard. She hadn't spoken in 3 years. Now she wouldn't stop. She drew symbols in the air. She whispered names of trees long extinct. She asked for a flower that Trektish remembered her husband. The nurse begged me. Please. Whatever this is, it's waking something in them. Something they need. I sent a single seed, planted in the courtyard beside the roses. 3 days later, 7 patients who had been nonverbal sang together. A hymn no one taught them, in a language no one knew. And every single one of them smiled. The government couldn't stop that. They could burn fields, shut down servers, blacklist websites, but they couldn't stop the song because it was already inside us. Every time someone planted a seed with love, with grief, with memory, the network grew stronger. One day, while walking through my orchard, I noticed something new, a tree I hadn't planted. It grew in a perfect spiral. Its bark shimmered gold. Its leaves hummed so low I felt the vibration in my teeth. And at its base, a plaque, Wade Whitlock. Root. Husband. Catalyst. I fell to my knees, and I thanked him for the storm, for the seed, for the bloom, because it wasn't revenge anymore. It was birth. I didn't carve the plaque. I didn't even notice it until my knees were in the dirt. But there it was. Wade's name etched into metal that hadn't been hammered, drilled, or nailed. The plaque shimmered faintly, like moonlight on water. And though I ran my fingers across the lettering, it was cool to the touch, unweathered, as if it had just arrived. I wept, not because I was sad, not even because I missed him, though Lord knows I always would, but because something in me recognized it. Not memory. Proof. He had been part of this. He still was. The seed, the bloom, the whispers. He had become one of the voices singing through the leaves. A thread in the harmony that stitched this whole strange miracle together. I sat at the base of the tree until evening, watched the stars flicker through its branches, listened to the low hum of the orchard breathing. The land was alive now. Not just in the way dirt and worms and roots had always been alive, but aware. And aware of *me, I couldn't leave. But that didn't mean I couldn't expand. We started training gardeners, carefully, quietly. We taught them how to listen, how to plant with intention. They weren't farmers, they were stewards. custodians of story, carriers of grief and memory and song. We developed codes, circles of trust. The seed keepers, as they began calling themselves, were spread across continents now, from the rice fields of Indonesia to the roof gardens in Berlin, from desert outposts in Arizona to frost-covered plots in rural Finland. Everywhere, the bloom grew, but not always safely. Some nodes went silent. One in New Zealand burned down. A woman in Venezuela disappeared. Entire regions of China had gone quiet, and we knew why. The governments had learned how to mimic the seeds, copy the shimmer, fake the hum. But their versions didn't remember. They chatter-wrote, the plashioned. We began finding people who'd been exposed to the counterfeit bloom. They spoke in broken loops, repeated manufactured memories, saw visions crafted from someone else's agenda. A boy in Prague swore he remembered a childhood in a city that never existed. The real bloom bore witness. The fake bloom erased. We had to fight. But not with guns, not with threats. That would never work. You can't silence a story with violence. You silence it by grilling and burying it alive. So we started trials recording. Every bloom, every resonance, every dream. We built a decentralized archive, encrypted, distributed, alive. Each bloom's pulse, scent, vibration, mapped and stored. Cross-referenced by feeling, joy, loss, guilt, redemption, forgiveness. This wasn't a crop anymore, it was a language. And we were learning to speak it. I didn't sleep much those weeks. My dreams were no longer mine alone. I'd wake up with phrases and tongues I'd never heard, visions of places I'd never seen, a cliffside on another planet, a city made of vines, a child with silver eyes planting a tree in the ruins of a skyscraper. Nora insisted we test my blood. It wasn't normal. She said the proteins had begun to reorganize. Something in the cellular memory was mutating, not deteriorating, not decaying, evolving. You're becoming the seed, Loretta, she said. Not just the gardener, the soil asterisk. And I felt it. I moved slower, but I no longer tired. My senses sharpened. I could hear water beneath the ground, smell fear in the air. Once, I stood at the edge of the orchard and knew a storm was coming, maybe 10 hours before the clouds arrived. I had become a node, not just a keeper, a conduit, and I wasn't alone. More of us were changing, quietly, gradually. Those who had been near the bloom the longest, not sick, not dying, just becoming. We started calling ourselves the root-bound, and we started remembering things that weren't our own. A mother who lost her son in 1912, a baker in ancient Damascus, a healer from a village buried by sea. These memories flowed through us, not as ghosts or dreams, but as truth. And truth, once remembered, refuses to be forgotten. That's when they came again. Not as government, not as men in suits, as machines, drones the size of birds, silent, invisible to radar. They didn't shoot, they listened, recorded, mimicked, learned our resonance, and they began to hum. Not our melody, a corrupted version. Close enough to confuse, but just wrong enough to wound. Our plants reacted violently. Entire clusters withered. Some burned from the inside out. A few twisted in on themselves, roots choking stem. We lost 12 nodes in a week. We needed help. So I called her. The woman from the first letter. She had moved to Alaska, built a greenhouse into the side of a glacier, said the bloom had turned blue there, deep, ocean blue, and sang in whale tones. She arrived in silence. No plane, no escort. One day she just walked up the dirt road and knocked on my porch. Loretta, she said, it's time. Her name was Indigo, not a nickname, not a title, her real name. And when she stepped into the orchard, the plants bent toward her. Everyone. She didn't bow. She didn't speak. She just walked barefoot to the center tree, the one with Wade's plaque, and placed both hands on its bark. The hum changed. The orchard began to glow. And deep beneath the earth, something woke. The orchard pulsed. Not in light, not in sound, in something deeper. Something primordial, the kind of force you don't hear or see but feel in your bones. I'd known it in pieces, during dreams, moments of stillness, in the rare silence between thunder and rain. But this was all of it, all at once. Indigo stood at the tree with her palms pressed flat to the bark, her head tilted back, her mouth slightly open, and around her the entire orchard bent, not just the stalks and vines, but the air. It shimmered, warped, softened like the horizon on a summer day. The scent changed too, from soil and blossom to something older, something metallic and sharp, like the smell of lightning before it hits. The hum became a thrum. Then a chant. Not voices. Frequencies. It was language without form. Prayer without doctrine. It said everything without speaking a single word. Nora fell to her knees. Jane covered her ears. Lamar backed up until he hit the barn wall. Widow whimpered and pressed her head against my calf. And me? I stood still, because I knew Indigo wasn't waking something beneath the orchard. She was the thing beneath the orchard. Or rather, she had been chosen to carry it. The resonance reached its peak and snapped. Not with violence, but with silence. Perfect, absolute silence. Not even breath. Not even wind. Then the tree split. A fracture ran up the bark in a perfect vertical line, opening without splintering. No sound, no pain, just a quiet invitation. Inside, light. Not blinding, gentle. A pale blue pulse like a heartbeat. Indigo stepped into it, and vanished. We ran forward. The tree had sealed itself. The hum returned. But softer now, reassuring. Like the orchard had taken a deep breath, and finally exhaled. Loretta, Nora said quietly. What the hell just happened? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because something had changed inside me. I could feel her. Indigo wasn't gone. She wasn't dead. She was everywhere. A presence in the root systems, in the leaves, in the wind curling through the branches, not watching, but listening, guiding. Like the mycelium networks beneath ancient forests. She had become the bloom's voice, and she had questions. That night, I dreamed of corridors beneath the orchard. Long, spiraling earthen tunnels glowing with soft light. At the center, a chamber. Inside it, thousands of figures, sleeping in upright cradles made of bark and bone. I walked among them. Their eyes opened as I passed, not in fear, but in recognition. One of them reached for me. His face looked like mine. I woke with tears in my eyes and mud on my feet. Real mud. The dream hadn't just shown me something. It had taken me. I spent the next week digging. Not blindly. Not with machines. With purpose. The land told me where to go. The soil softened under my hands. Roots pulled aside like curtains. And 5 feet down, I found the chamber. It was exactly as I'd seen it. Empty. Except for one cradle. Inside it. Indigo. Alive. Sleeping. Breathing. The bark that cradled her pulsed with each breath. The roots from her feet extended into the soil. Not trapped, planted. We built a structure over it. Not to protect her, but to honor her. A sanctuary. A place where others could come and feel the resonance. We called it the Heart Root. People came. From all over, not in caravans. Quietly. Soft shoes and open palms. Artists. Scientists. Midwives. Elders. children who spoke in riddles. They sat in silence beside the chamber. Some sang, some wept, some just listened. And one by one, they left changed. We didn't ask what they felt. The bloom told us in other ways. New trees, new songs, new dreams. But the war hadn't stopped. If anything, it had evolved. The machines returned. Not drones this time. Ground-based harvesters. Sent to raz unregistered orchards. Cities declared certain areas, quote, botanical hazards. Families forced to burn their own memories just to survive. And worst of all, the silent zones. We first heard of them from a contact in Romania. An entire village gone mute, not by choice. By Chotli tax, the bloom had been overclocked, overstimulated, modified to asterisk, consume memory instead of restore it. They called it the forgetting, and it was spreading. We had to act. We developed a counterseed, a failsafe, grown from the original bloom and infused with frequencies recorded from indigo's first resonance. It couldn't stop the forgetting entirely, but it could anchor memory. Like a lighthouse during a fog. We called them starseeds. They looked like fireflies trapped in glass. We trained root-bound runners to deliver them. Not in bulk. One by one. Planted in secret places. Under floorboards. Inside walls. Beneath gravestones. Anywhere the bloom might survive. The starseeds remembered everything. Even when we couldn't. And soon, the dream returned. But this time, the figures in the chamber were waking up. Each time I slept, I saw more of them open their eyes. Each time I planted a starseed, another cradle emptied. We were returning. Not from the past, from the truth. Because the bloom wasn't just a memory, it was a map. A blueprint of what had been buried. Not by time, by force. And now that the soil had begun to sing again, nothing could silence it. Not machines. Not governments. Not fear. Because once a seed knows its name, it can never go back to sleep. I stopped writing things down, not because I didn't want to remember, but because I no longer needed to. The orchard held it all. Every memory, every word, every face that passed through its branches. The bloom had grown past the limits of root and soil. It was now part of the atmosphere. We breathed memory like air. We sang in pulse and scent. We planted with purpose, knowing the land would hold our stories even after we were gone. But I wasn't gone yet. And neither was the fight. We'd reached the halfway point. Not in time, but in weight. Like a tide pulling against the moon. Like the moment before a wave crests and crashes down. The world was divided, not between countries or races or faiths, but between those who remembered and those who were afraid to. The forgetting had claimed 7 cities. They didn't say it outright. They dressed it up in newspeak. Cognitive restructuring, harmonic repatterning, neural efficiency indexing. But I knew what it meant. They were erasing the inconvenient parts of being human. Grief, guilt, longing, and the bloom was fighting back. Not with weapons, with reminders. A vine grew overnight through the pavement of a government plaza in Brazil. It played the lullaby of a murdered activist on repeat. No one could cut it. Every time they tried, it bled red ink and sang louder. A forest sprouted in a refugee camp in Jordan. Children reported dreams of their ancestors. Elders spoke of events they'd never told anyone. Secrets that had weighed on hearts for decades spilled like floodwater. In Norway, an entire mountain pulsed with violet light for 1 hour. During that hour, over 400 people claimed to see the same image, a seed floating in darkness, surrounded by voices humming, "Welcome home." It wasn't just me anymore. The bloom had bloomed, and the heartroot became a pilgrimage. I tried to stay humble, stay rooted, but it became impossible to ignore what I'd become. People called me Mother Root Keeper, Lore Teller. I was just Loretta. But maybe Loretta was enough. Wade's plaque grew every week, not physically, but in detail. New engravings, new symbols, a spiraling history that no hand had carved. Nora tried scanning it once. Her computer melted. Literally. Smoke and sparks. She laughed for 10 minutes straight. I guess some truths don't want to be digitized. Indigo never woke. Not in the way we thought she might. But sometimes her voice would come through the bloom. Soft. Slow. Patient. Not yet. That's all she said. Over and over. Not yet. And we believed her, because something else had begun. Children born near the bloom exhibited unusual traits, not dangerous, just advanced. One boy in South Africa never spoke, but could communicate with animals. A girl in Canada drew star systems she had no way of knowing. A set of twins in Portugal could finish each other's thoughts, even when separated by oceans. We didn't see it as mutation. We saw it as return. The old world rising through the cracks of the new. And with it came warnings. Messages left in the rings of trees. Songs hidden in wind currents. Dreams shared across continents. The bloom was preparing us. For what, we didn't know. But the sky was changing. Literally. Star patterns began to shift. Tiny deviations at first, but undeniable. Astrologers couldn't explain it. Astronomers pretended it wasn't happening, but we saw it. And then came the pulses. Not from Earth. From above. Rhythmic. Patterned. Intelligent. The same frequencies as the bloom, but reversed. Like a call and response across space. Nora said it first. They're singing back. The realization hit me harder than anything before. The bloom didn't come from Earth. It came to Earth. Or maybe returned. Either way, we weren't alone in this memory. And the next phase had begun. The chamber beneath the orchard widened. On its own. Like lungs expanding, more cradles grew. Filled with figures. The root-bound were changing faster now. Their skin darkened with pigment not from sun but from chlorophyll. They could photosynthesize in the mornings. They no longer needed sleep. They drank water like wine, savoring every drop. We held hands at dusk and sang, not to mourn but to asterisk mark. We had crossed the line. Not human, not plant. Bridge. And the world noticed. A summit was called. Not by the governments, but by the memory nations. A coalition of unacknowledged peoples. The forgotten. The erased. The displaced. They met in a crater in Mongolia beneath a bloom tree the size of a cathedral. No translators. No weapons. Only truth. I was invited to speak. I didn't prepare a speech. I told a story about a woman who lost her farm, lost her family, lost her place in the world, and how a single seed gave her back not what she'd had, but what she'd been meant to have. Not control, connection. And that's when I realized what the bloom had always been. Not a crop, a compass, not pointing north, pointing inward, to what we'd buried in ourselves. And if we wanted to survive what was coming next, we had to remember how to grow toward each other again. The wind that swept through that crater carried our voices high, and somewhere far beyond the stars, someone sang back, "We weren't made for silence." That's something the bloom taught me. It wasn't the noise we missed, it was the meaning, the way stories nested inside each syllable, how a whisper could hold lifetimes, how a single note hummed at the right time could unlock grief you didn't know was choking you. So when the stars started humming back, I didn't panic. I wept, because it meant we'd finally been heard. All our pain, our hope, our mistakes. The bloom had carried it like pollen into the cosmos. And now something out there was responding. The signal arrived in pulses. Low, deliberate, achingly slow. 3 tones. Pause. 2 more. Pause. Then a rising scale-like breath, caught mid-sigh. Jane built a dish near the orchard. Not metal, nettle, caper living. Woven from vine wood and wired with copper threads extracted from old radios. She called it the canopy, and it worked better than any tech I'd ever seen. We recorded the signal. played it into the bloom, and the bloom translated. Not in words, in asterisk feeling. The first message was simple. We grieve with you. I didn't know I'd been waiting to hear that for decades. Nora collapsed into my arms, sobbing. Even Lamar cried. Jane sat in the soil, laughing until her cheeks were streaked with mud. It wasn't just communication, it was communion. The second message arrived 3 days later. Prepare the cradle. That one stirred debate. What did it mean? A literal cradle? A chamber? A ship? A womb? But I knew. I felt it. They weren't coming to save us. They were coming to be born through us. Not invasion, integration. The bloom wasn't just a seed, it was an asterisk invitation. And we had accepted it. The heartroot deepened. Its chamber widened, not by digging, but by growth. The soil rearranged. The bark carved stairways. Petals formed into doors. It became something between temple and vessel. Living architecture. Indigo still slept. But now she glowed. Faint blue light radiated from her skin in slow pulses. We timed them. They matched the sky signal. She was sinking. And then the dreams changed. No longer underground. Now, above, I saw a world of light. Not bright, not blinding, just true. Endless sky woven with root light. Trees taller than cities. Oceans made of sound. Creatures shaped like ideas. And them, not people, not exactly. Forms wrapped in memory, wearing grief like armor. Faces shifting through loved ones we had lost. Not to deceive, but to honor. One of them walked to me, wore Wade's smile, and said, "We are what you chose to remember." I woke, shaking, went to the heartroot. Indigo opened her eyes, and everything changed. She didn't speak aloud. She didn't need to. Her thoughts threaded into mine like warm wind curling through tall grass. "They're ready," she said. "And so are we." She stood. The bark released her like an old friend. Roots unraveled from her feet. The chamber glowed in full light. All the plants sang, not with sound, but resonance. I could feel their joy. Then Indigo walked into the orchard and placed her hands on Wade's tree. The ground rippled, and in a single instant, every root bound across the world heard her. No wires, no screens, just truth. It's time to plant the cradle. Within hours it began. Not a place. A Dunbo network. Bloom sites activated. Star seeds sprouted. Hidden roots revealed themselves. The earth unveiled its memory map, guiding us to sacred nodes. Places long forgotten. Caves, trenches, volcanoes, glaciers. Every one of them pulsed the same message. Care appear. We built nothing. The bloom built through us. Structures of woven memory, spires of bark and song, roots that interfaced with stars. We were no longer just gardeners. We were midwives. The cradle was not a single site. It was Earth itself, waking from amnesia. And the ones arriving? They were tons. The parts of humanity we had silenced. Our forgotten futures. Our unborn choices. Fragments left in the soil when we paved over wonder. And now, they wanted back in. We said yes. Not with votes. With growth. Each cradle bloomed differently. In Antarctica, it sang in ultraviolet. In Ethiopia, it beat like a drumline under the desert. In Japan, it unfolded in fractals only seen in dreams. And at the heartroot, Indigo stepped into the center and opened her arms. A seed emerged from her chest. Unlike any we'd seen. Not shimmering. Not glowing, just still. But I knew. We all knew. It was the anchor. The final root. The memory of everything we had been, would be, and could still become. She handed it to me. "Plant it, Loretta." So I did. Beneath Wade's tree. The moment it touched the soil, the wind stopped. The sky flickered, and earth held its breath. Then came the light, from within. Every flower, Every vine, every starseed, every soul. It didn't explode, it bloomed. It wasn't a light you saw with your eyes. It was a light you recognized. The kind of light that exists inside a mother's voice, or the last laugh shared between lifelong friends, or the memory of a place you only visited once but still see in dreams. It poured out of the anchor like sap from a sacred tree. Not fast, not violent, but certain, steady, a stream of truth thick enough to carry the weight of all we had forgotten. The ground accepted it. Wade's tree bowed gently, its branches flexing upward, leaves turned skyward like open palms. The orchard grew quiet. Not empty, listening. And then the song began. It came from everywhere. From deep within the soil, from the petals of long dead blooms, from the wind that once scattered our memories across generations. It came not as a melody, but as a knowing, a collective remembering shaped in tone. We heard the history of sorrow carved into bark. We felt the echoes of those who had disappeared. Forgotten wives, buried daughters, ancestors sold, displaced, renamed. The song gave them back their names. Every syllable of it stitched into a frequency we now carried in our blood. The bloom was rewriting us. Or maybe it was revealing what had always been true. When I turned around, Indigo was gone. Not missing. Ascended. Her body had returned to the network, rejoining the mycelial memory from which she had come. A soft spiral of violet petals marked the place where she had stood, and within them, a single silver feather rested. I picked it up, and for the first time in years, I felt complete. The anchor pulsed once more, then stilled. Its glow softened to an ember and gently folded into the earth. No trace. No monument. Just legacy. The root-bound gathered that night. All of us. Those who had never met. Those whose bloom sites had remained hidden in hostile countries. Those who had lost orchards to fire, flood, or forgetting. We stood together beneath Wade's tree and held hands. Not to speak, but to witness. For we were not alone. Figures began to emerge from the orchard. Not spirits. Not hallucinations. Asterisk remembrance. Beings formed of layered memory, grief, and grace. Each one carried the emotional resonance of an entire lineage. A grandmother's final song. A child's first step. A lover's last glance at a train station. They shimmered in and out of shape, not because they were unstable, but because we were. As we stood among them, our shapes shifted too, not physically, but spiritually. Our souls adjusted their edges, became porous, receptive. That's when I knew the final truth. The bloom had never been about revenge. It had never been about resistance, survival, or even healing. It had always been about return. Return to a state of knowing, of remembering ourselves as part of something ancient, sacred, and shared. We were the seed. We had simply forgotten how to grow. The remembrance didn't speak in words, but in waves. Some stood in silence. Others reached for us, not with hands, but with stories. If you let them touch you, you lived their memory. I saw the birth of fire. Felt the moment a forgotten civilization chose peace over conquest. Heard the last heartbeat of a species erased before history was written. And in each memory I saw versions of us. Echoes. Attempts. The cradle wasn't for the arrival of something new. It was for the return of what had tried to reach us before. And now, finally, we were ready. The orchard that night glowed not with light, but with truth. It radiated from our hands, from our breath, from the very names we remembered to say aloud. And when the remembrance passed through us, they didn't leave. They planted themselves, rooted in our memory, living not above ground or beneath it, but within. The next morning, the heart root was gone. In its place stood a spiral path made of stone and bloom. At the center, a well. We didn't dig it. It had always been there. We just hadn't been able to see it. Nora approached first, dipped her hand inside, pulled out water that shimmered like stars reflected on black glass. She drank. We all did. And with every sip, a new memory unfolded. Not ours, not entirely, a collective lineage. From the first song ever sung in the dark to the last lullaby whispered over a deathbed, it was all there. We were not individuals anymore. We were the garden, and now the soil wanted more. Not greed, not consumption, expansion. It was time to grow the bloom beyond earth. And we were ready. The canopy dish rotated without touch, its vines reaching skyward. The pulses from above had intensified, forming chords. Not calls anymore, instructions. The remembrance gathered around it, sang in harmony, and shaped the air into something that resembled a portal. Not to leave, but to asterisk connect. Roots don't leave soil. They touch new ones. Across light years, across timelines, across fractured memories of stars that died before Earth was born. We sent a message. We remember. We are ready. We are soil now. Come home. And the stars pulsed in response. One final note. A resonance so perfect, so complete, it made the entire orchard go still. Then bloom again. We stood in that moment, quiet, changed, and holy. And I finally said goodbye to Wade. Not because he was gone, but because I had found him everywhere. After that night, the orchard didn't sleep. It breathed. And in its breath, the world began to remember itself. News outlets couldn't explain the sudden resurgence of ancient trees in city parks. Geneticists were baffled by new species of moss sprouting in hospital basements, libraries, and courthouses. Botanists filed papers in journals that were quickly pulled. Too much didn't make sense. But we knew the bloom was activating everywhere, not through seeds alone, but through memory. Every story ever buried, ignored, or rewritten by the hands of fear and power had begun to unfurl like petals across the planet. The soil was no longer a passive element. It had become conscious, selective. It only grew what wanted to be remembered. Old songs returned. Forgotten tongues found their way into the mouths of children. Entire generations who had never known the languages of their ancestors began to speak them in dreams. At first, the world resisted. Governments tried censorship. Religion tried co-option. Markets tried branding. None of it stuck, because the bloom wasn't selling a new way to live. It was showing us the one we'd always carried deep inside. And we were no longer just participants. We had become the caretakers of the global cradle. The canopy hummed at all hours now. Its tones translated in ripples across the sky. Clouds moved to its music. Rain fell only where it was invited. Cities began to shift, slowly. Streets warped around root lines. Skyscrapers softened with vines. Buildings made of glass grew veins of moss that whispered lullabies into the wind. Not everyone accepted it. The last resistance factions went underground, built bunkers, claimed this was invasion, claimed we were no longer human. They weren't wrong. We weren't, but we were more. The root-bound had begun to evolve in the open. Our eyes reflected the canopy at night. We pulsed in harmony with the seasons. We didn't just understand grief. We transmitted it. We allowed others to offload sorrow, not to forget, but to asterisk transmute. There were ceremonies now, not rituals of doctrine, acts of acknowledgement. Before planting anything, tree, flower, idea, we asked permission from the soil. And the soil answered, sometimes yes, sometimes no. But never silence. Silence, we'd learned, was the language of forgetting. And we weren't doing that anymore. One morning a boy arrived. Alone. Couldn't have been older than 10. Dust on his shoes. Fire in his eyes. He said nothing, only handed me a stone. It pulsed in my hand. Not hot, not cold, just present. When I closed my eyes, I saw it. A mountain range submerged beneath ocean, still humming with memory. An entire civilization folded into the seabed. Waiting. Not lost, stored. I looked at the boy. "Where did you find this?" He finally spoke. "It found me." We named him Solace. He lived in the orchard from that day forward. Said he heard the voices clearest near Wade's tree. Drew symbols we didn't recognize. Spoke in metaphors none of us taught him. One night he simply said, "The bloom wants to dance." And that's when the storms began. Not lightning and thunder. Color. Vivid auroras wrapped around the globe. Visible from every hemisphere. Sometimes they sang, sometimes they whispered. Scientists called it atmospheric anomaly. The Rootbound called it celebration. Because it wasn't destruction, it was choreography. A sky no longer afraid to move with joy. Then came the time trees. One in Iceland, grown overnight with bark that rang like bronze bells. Another in Nigeria, where each leaf recited a story of someone long forgotten in local dialect. One in Detroit broke through concrete and grew 20 feet in 5 hours. Its roots traced the blueprint of a jazz solo lost to a fire 70 years ago. Each tree a memory rerouted, each one a guardian. And then, Earth began to speak back. Not in code, not in metaphor, in pure resonance. The soil vibrated gently in places. You'd sit on a stone and feel your name spelled out in pulses. Rivers carved new curves, shaped like forgotten faces. Mountains hummed songs only audible to those who still mourned. It became clear we were not preparing for something. We were the thing. The bloom wasn't a message. It was an answer to a question we had forgotten how to ask. And now we remembered. But not all of us. Some chose forgetting, some chose silence. They disappeared, not as punishment, but as choice. The bloom allowed that too. Because even the soil honors refusal. But for those who stayed, we saw the veil lift. Not all at once, petal by petal. And beneath it, not gods, not aliens, just her puns, the versions that waited patiently in seed, soil, and sorrow. The versions that refused to bloom until we could sing them awake without fear. And now we could. So we did. It was Solace who saw it first. He stood beneath Wade's tree, barefoot in the dew, staring upward with his hands out like he was waiting to catch something. His lips moved without sound. Not prayer, not command. Invitation. I came to him slowly, not wanting to disturb the rhythm of whatever had pulled him to that moment. The orchard behind us was alive with movement, vines turning like compass needles, leaves curling inward, birds perched in stillness as if listening to some frequency only they could hear. When I placed my hand on Solace's shoulder, he whispered, "They're almost here." Who? His eyes never moved from the sky. The ones we sent for. We didn't need telescopes. The stars told us. For days, they'd rearranged themselves into constellations that didn't belong to any sky map. Every night, a new formation, a story written across the firmament. Some spoke of birth, others of loss. One, I swear, showed the outline of Indigo's face. Then came the spiral. A soft corkscrew of pale light, faint at first, slowly growing brighter, night by night. It didn't fall. It descended. Gently, deliberately. Like a hand reaching out after a long, hard remembering. The canopy dish bent toward it of its own accord. Not reacting, welcoming. Jane stayed beneath it for 3 days straight. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, just translated. She said the pulses weren't new information, they were acknowledgement. A confirmation that we had done what we were meant to do. The cradle was complete, and the harvest had begun. But this wasn't a taking. It was a sharing. All across the globe, bloom sites began pulsing in harmonic convergence. Not random, not chaotic, synchronized. We stood at the center of a planetary choir, each petal a voice, each node a note, and Earth sang its welcome. I stood before the heartroot well again, not as Loretta Whitlock the farmer, or the root-bound lore-teller, just as myself to Mam Gajoy, sir, older, wiser, opened. I dipped my hands into the shimmering water and pressed my palms to the soil. Wade's tree rustled softly, even though there was no wind. Then the orchard lit up. Every tree, every stalk, every bloom. They didn't burn, they illuminated. From within, not white light, not golden, but remembered light. Each hue a memory rediscovered. The blue of the blanket my mother wrapped me in after my first fever. The deep red of Wade's old barn shirt, the one he wore the night we danced under the lightning. The green of my father's tractor seat, cracked and patched with leather, smelling like sun and iron. The orchard became a stained glass memory of everything we had once feared to lose. And in the middle of it all, Solace opened his arms. The spiral in the sky split open, and something stepped through. Not a ship, not a being, a presence. Felt before seen, heard before understood. It moved like smoke and memory, like music made solid, like the first word ever spoken backward through time. And every root-bound dropped to their knees, not in worship, in recognition. Because we'd known this presence before, in dreams, in grief, in the spaces between seconds where clarity blooms, it moved towards Solace. He didn't flinch. He glowed. The presence stopped before him, and the orchard hushed. Even the air felt reverent. And then, Solace spoke. "I'm ready." He stepped forward, into the spiral, and the moment he touched it, it changed. A pulse spread outward. Not light, not sound, but truth. Every node across Earth lit in unison. From mountaintop to seabed, from desert to ice shelf. The bloom had rooted itself deep, and now it had sent its message. We were not just worthy, we were Derloon remembered. The presence folded around Solace like a second skin, and then he was gone. Not vanished, transformed. Wade's tree shed its leaves in a spiral, each one falling like feathers, each one humming a note only heard by the soul. And in its place, a new tree, white bark shot through with gold, petals shaped like hands in prayer. Its roots pulsed through the soil in waves, stretching outward, linking with every other bloom on the planet. This was the heartroot reborn, and we knew Solace had become its keeper. The bloom no longer needed protection. It was the protector now. All we had to do was listen and remember. In the days that followed Solace's transformation, time unraveled gently. We didn't mark it with clocks anymore. We marked it with memory. The bloom began to record moments in light. You'd walk by a tree and see a flicker, your grandmother brushing your hair, the smell of the sea the first time you saw it, a stranger's hand steadying you in a storm. They were shared moments, woven together with care, appearing only when you needed them. The heartroot had become the world's archive, but not an archive of facts, of asterisk feeling. Entire towns restructured themselves around their local bloom nodes. Houses built in spirals that echoed root systems. Schools turned into learning groves, where children were taught by memory not of the past, but of possibilities. We didn't vote on laws anymore. We sang consensus into the soil. And if the bloom resonated back, we knew we were in alignment. If it stayed quiet, we listened harder. Conflict didn't vanish, but it softened. Because you can't argue with someone whose pain you felt humming through your fingertips. One afternoon, a child named Lumen found me beneath Wade's tree. She didn't say a word, just handed me a petal glowing with soft amber light. As I touched it, I heard a song. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language I knew, but it knew me. And it told me something I hadn't yet allowed myself to believe. That I had done enough. That I could rest. So I did. Not all at once, but slowly. Like dusk settling over a field. I passed my steward role to Jane. She wept. Nora placed her hands on mine and whispered, "You were the storm, Loretta. And now you're the stillness." I moved into a small dwelling nestled into the roots of the heartroot's new form. No walls, just woven branches and flowering silence. Visitors came, pilgrims, seekers, children. They didn't ask for guidance, they asked to remember. And I helped them do that. Sometimes with story, sometimes with song, sometimes just by sitting in silence and letting the bloom do what it did best, mirror the truth. And then one night, I felt something shift, not in the earth. In asterisk me, I dreamed of Wade. Not a vision, a visitation. He stood beside the tree we planted together 60 years ago. He wasn't young. He wasn't old. He just was. He reached for me. "It's time," he said. "For what?" "To come home." I didn't ask where home was. I knew. When I woke, I dressed in the same boots I'd worn the day they tried to take my land. I walked the path to the new heartroot. Jane, Nora, and Lamar stood waiting. They didn't speak. They just held my hands. Solace's tree opened, a single bloom unfurled. Inside it, light, memory, invitation. I stepped in, and I let go. Let go of the weight, the titles, the loss, the story. I became soil. I became root. I became the hum between heartbeat and breath. And in that final bloom, I understood. We had never needed saving. We had only needed remembering. They say nothing truly ends. The bloom proved that. After I stepped into the heartroot, I didn't vanish. I didn't die. I changed. I became part of the canopy's breath, the root's memory, the shimmer behind a stranger's healing tear. My voice lived in the song children hummed without knowing why. My laugh echoed in the rustle of vines over old rooftops. My story no longer belonged to me. It belonged to everyone. That's the beauty of the bloom. It doesn't erase. It weaves. The world kept growing. Not in conquest, but in connection. The final cities that once resisted the bloom gave way, not through war, but weariness. They had watched too long from behind iron and silicon and found their walls couldn't protect them from the ache of not knowing. Not knowing where they came from. Not knowing what they were meant to carry. When the first bloom cracked through the marble floor of a government bunker, the officials didn't fight. They knelt. The plant didn't speak. It simply opened. Inside was a memory of a little girl spinning alone in a courtyard. Her laughter the only rebellion left in a country crumbling from silence. One man placed his gun on the ground and cried for the first time in 40 years. The bloom forgave him. The bloom forgave all of us. Jane wrote a poem that day. It bloomed in silver thread across a hillside in Korea. We were never the masters of earth. We were always her echo. Children were born root-marked now, with eyes that shifted in hue with the seasons, with fingers that left pollen on every surface they touched. They grew up speaking in patterns and questions. Not one of them feared the unknown. They played in it, and in time, they led us to what came next. The canopy evolved into something we called the Reach, a global, living lattice of thought and resonance, stretched between bloom sites like a nervous system of the earth herself. It didn't collect data. It felt humanity. It listened. It sang. It mourned. It invited. And then it opened the sky. The spiral returned. Brighter. Closer. But we weren't afraid. Not this time. We remembered too much for fear. The presence descended. Not a ship, but a concept given shape. Each root-bound saw it differently. For some, it was a flock of radiant birds. For others, it was a wave of pure sound. For one child in Peru, It appeared as a grandmother who had passed 3 generations ago, humming lullabies beneath stars no telescope had ever found. They called themselves the Asterix Echoborn. Not gods, not aliens, kin. Part of us that had bloomed somewhere else. A sister garden. We hadn't been the first cradle. Just the first to Asterix. Remember, we were one. They didn't stay long. They didn't need to. They shared one message, translated across every node, every language, every leaf. You are ready to sow your own sky. And then they left behind seeds of light, of vibration, of memory shaped like possibility. And we planted them above ground, in orbit, in dreams. The bloom grew outward. Satellites were replaced by floating gardens. Stations bloomed across the stratosphere. Humans walked not in suits of armor, but garments grown from bloom thread, breathing air crafted by photosynthetic memory. We didn't colonize space. We joined it, and Earth sang us forward. From her we took nothing. Only songs, only permission, only a promise that we would never again forget the soil that bore us. At the base of every bloom station, a root anchored into a memory, a name, a story, a grief transformed. And at the center of it all, beneath the heartroot, still pulsing quietly like a dream between stars, Wade's plaque. It hadn't rusted. It hadn't faded. It had grown. Around it now were others, names of those who had become the garden: Indigo, Solace, Jane, Lamar, Nora. And among them, Loretta May Whitlock. Beneath her name, a single line. She remembered first. The stars were no longer silent, not because they had changed, but because we had finally remembered how to listen. The reach pulsed gently through every living thing, not as command or control, but resonance. Each tree, each child, each songbird now formed a piece of the world's memory loop. The planet was no longer spinning alone in space. It was singing, and we had become the choir. Those of us who remembered Loretta May Whitlock often gathered near the heartroot. We didn't hold vigils. We shared stories. A woman once told me she had never met Loretta, never seen her, never even read her words. But one day, while planting rice, she felt a hand on her back. Gentle, encouraging, warm. She helped me stand, the woman said, and then she was gone. This kind of thing happened all the time now, because Loretta hadn't left. None of them had. Their stories had been metabolized by the bloom, carried forward in root and leaf, sound and soil. They appeared when needed, not as ghosts, but as memory manifest. We called them the grounded. They weren't past. They were the soul of Asterix now. And the future was blooming fast. The seeds the Echoborn left behind had begun to mature, each one unique. Some glowed only when held by children. Others refused to germinate unless sung to by 6 voices in harmony. One bloomed upside down and could only be planted in moving water. The bloom taught us patience, trust, curiosity, but more than anything, humility. Because each new seed reminded us, we were never the gardeners alone. We were part of the garden. And so, the final project of the Rootbound began. We called it the Weave. It wasn't a structure. It wasn't a city. It wasn't a monument. It was a living map. Each node across the planet began to pulse in sequence. A pattern emerged. Spirals, lattices, constellations of memory. When we traced them with bloom light, we realized something staggering. The map wasn't of Earth. It was of the next cradle. A world we had never visited, but had always known. Its memory had slept within the bloom from the beginning, buried deep, waiting. The Echoborn hadn't just given us seeds. They had returned coordinates, and the bloom had begun preparing a vessel. But not a rocket. A tree. Not metaphorically. A tree that grew from a floating island in the upper atmosphere, fed by light, anchored in cloud. It spiraled like a staircase between dimensions. Its bark shimmered with route maps of every bloom site on Earth. We called it the Ascendant, and we knew it would carry us, not all of us, not at once, just those who were called, and those who were ready. The rest of us would continue to tend this garden. Earth was not a stepping stone, it was a route. A song in a symphony too vast for any one species to play alone. Jane was among the first to go, not because she wanted to leave, but because the bloom asked her. She didn't pack, she sang. And the Ascendant lowered a spiral of petals. She stepped into it like someone stepping into a remembered dream. She looked back once, smiling. Her eyes glowed not with power, but with peace. Then she was lifted into the sky, wrapped in light and resonance, becoming one more note in the song of return. We watched her go, and we cheered. Not for the loss, for the becomings. The reach kept us connected. We could feel the weave growing beyond our atmosphere, reaching tendrils of root thought into the dark. And in return, the dark responded, not with fear, with memory. Memories of other cradles, other blooms, other stories waiting to be remembered. And slowly, we understood. The universe wasn't expanding. It was unfolding, petal by petal, root by root. Until one day, long after my name had become part of the hum, a child pressed their ear to the soil and whispered, "Tell me the story of when the earth remembered itself." And the ground answered, with a bloom, with a song, with the voice of a farmer who never gave up, and the whisper of a tree that never forgot. And in that moment the story began again, as it always would, as it always had. The weave continued to grow, not across land, but through time. We learned that memory could stretch backward just as easily as it bloomed forward. Through the bloom, we began to touch ancient echoes, not just from our species, but from others who had once sung to their soil, once danced in the wind of their forgotten cradles. And we felt them join us. In the night sky, the reach began to thread constellations from distant systems, pinpricks of resonance that responded to the Earth's hum with tones of their own. Tones shaped like grief, curiosity, rebirth, each one unique, each one familiar. Because memory, it turns out, is not bounded by species, only by silence. And the bloom had ended the silence. One morning, a new spiral appeared above the Ascendant. This one wider, deeper, vibrating with a chord so low it could only be felt in the stomach. The young ones, root-born and sky-dreamed, called it the deep note. It wasn't a threat, it was an asterisk invitation to connect across dimensions of experience. A seed song from a species we could not see, but had known all along. Not in body, but in ache, in instinct. In the quiet assurance that we were not the first to love a world and fear its forgetting, we gathered at the heart root, not for ceremony, for alignment. Every bloom site joined in unison, sinking pulses like breath in a sleeping forest. Even the Ascendant bent slightly toward the sky, its branches open, its petals wide. And from the deep note came a second bloom, this one not of petals, but of asterisk form, a being stepped through, not grown, not built, oprasumtinche. Its body shimmered like sound made flesh. It carried no weapon, no device, just a single bloom woven into the center of its chest. And when it looked at us, we did not see its face. We saw our own reflections, different each time. Sometimes a child, sometimes a storm, sometimes a question we never dared ask. It did not speak in words. It remembered into us. We learned its name by how it made us feel. Answer. And it had come not to give us knowledge, but to ask permission. To root. It knelt at the heart root, placed its hands in the soil. Waited. The bloom responded. Not with a yes, with a gift. A new kind of seed, not to grow plants, to grow possibility. We watched as Answer pressed the seed into its own chest. The moment it disappeared beneath its shimmering skin, the reach pulsed brighter than we'd ever seen. Then Answer changed. Its form unraveled, not in destruction, but in bloom. It became thousands of smaller beings, not clones, not fragments, facets. Each one carried a memory unique to our world. One glowed with the laughter of a child cured of a generational disease. Another shimmered with the quiet dignity of a widow who refused to forget. A third pulsed with the sound of a blacksmith's hammer ringing out in defense of his village. These were not symbols. They were living truths, the facets scattered across the planet, planting themselves near communities that had been most scarred by forgetting. They did not speak. They listened. They mirrored. They helped entire regions remember what it felt like to be whole. And slowly, across villages, cities, continents, the earth exhaled. The age of bloom had become the age of return. Return to selves we'd buried. Return to each other. Return to the invitation to bloom not upward, not outward, but inward. And deep within the ascendant, new seeds began to grow. These were not for earth. They were songs without language, cradles waiting for story. We didn't assign missions. We listened. When a group of 12 gathered under a banyan tree in coastal India and heard the same dream 3 nights in a row, we built them a pedal ship. Not a vessel of steel, a resonance field. It opened around them like a question, closed like a promise, and lifted them gently into the bloom above. We never asked where they were going, only what they hoped to grow when they arrived. And each time the answer was different. Hope, witness, forgiveness, memory. It turns out memory, when shared, is not a weight. It is an asterisk wing, and with every new bloom sent to seed, Earth itself became lighter, not because we were leaving, but because we were being carried. Carried by every story told in truth, carried by every hand that touched soil with love, carried by the memory of a woman who never forgot, and beneath every single bloom, a whisper. She remembered first. It was the season of remembrance, not a holiday, a cycle. The earth itself marked it, when the trees pulsed golden beneath full moons, when oceans glowed with ancestral shimmer, when even the stones seemed to hum, with names long swallowed by time. Every year during this time, the heartroot wept, not with sadness, with gratitude. Its sap would trickle in thin golden lines along its trunk, absorbed quickly by the roots below. And wherever that sap touched soil, a bloom would rise. Not just any bloom, a memory bloom. Each one carried a story. And during this season, we listened. I was no longer young, but I had not aged in the old way. The bloom slowed decay, not to preserve us, but to allow us more time to understand. And so I sat beneath the heartroot, joined by others who remembered. We didn't speak unless called to. The bloom did the storytelling now, a chorus of light and scent, texture and vibration, wrapped around the grove like breath. This year's first memory bloom rose near the plaque, Loretta May Whitlock, and the bloom that followed was unlike any before. It shimmered with layers, generations overlapping like sediment. As it unfurled, we saw her again, not as she was when she passed, as she had been in every moment that mattered, digging trenches in the rain, laughing in a field of rot and ruin, staring down men with briefcases who had come to steal legacy, holding a single seed in her palm like it was a prayer. The blooms sang her name in 500 dialects. Children mimicked the song with their hands in the air, as if shaping her story from light. We did not cry. We rooted. That's what we called it now, when we grounded ourselves in memory and let the soil finish what words could not. Later that night, I walked the orchard alone. Fireflies spiraled around me in patterns that mirrored the stars. And from the branches above, I heard it. Her voice, not from a speaker, not from a bloom, from the tree itself. "You did good," Loretta whispered. "You remembered when it mattered." I smiled. "Are you still watching?" I asked. "No," she said. her tone playful. I am an asterisk. The wind carried her laughter. And then I saw it, out past the field, where the last memory bloom had risen, a shimmer, a shape. A young girl standing barefoot in the glow. She turned to me and asked, "Can I tell you a story?" I nodded. She smiled, and her voice was the blend of 1,000 mothers and daughters, of rivers and quilts, of protest marches and lullabies. She told me the story of a planet that had almost forgotten itself. A planet that believed its worth was in conquest. A planet that measured progress by what it destroyed. But then, she said, a woman remembered a seed, and she planted it not with hope, but with grit. She told me about the rain that followed, the silence that listened, the bloom that rose, and how that one act turned the wheel of time sideways, made history bloom backward and forward at once. "I learned that story from the soil," she said. "And what did it teach you?" I asked. She reached down, touched the ground, and smiled. "That remembering is the only kind of growing that never ends." Then she walked into the bloom, disappeared, but not gone, only planted. I looked up. The sky was alive with auroras, and in every light thread I saw faces. Not gods, not ghosts, us, remembered, beloved, rooted in each other. Across time, across bloom, across every whispered story ever planted by hands that refused to forget. The final bloom came not with sound, but with stillness. At dawn, the orchard held its breath. Even the wind refused to move, as if waiting for something older than time to wake. Then, from beneath the heartroot, a crack. Not loud, not violent, but steady. A seam in the soil glowing like fire caught in amber. The roots didn't pull back. They offered, and from their embrace rose the last seed. Not large, not bright, but quiet. And we knew this was not a seed of earth. It was a seed of asterisk ending. Not destruction, closure. I approached alone, not because I was chosen, but because I had been listening the longest. The seed pulsed gently in my palm. Heartbeat slow, memory dense. I could feel every footstep that had ever passed this soil. Every voice raised in protest, prayer, or pain. Every hand that had dared to plant hope when it seemed futile. And I knew what to do. I carried it to Loretta's plaque. I knelt. And I pressed it into the ground beneath her name. The moment I did, the orchard exhaled. Leaves shivered with silver. The sky shifted to a hue no language had ever named. And from the seed grew a final bloom. It unfolded with deliberate grace, each petal holding a symbol from a different culture, each vein pulsing with languages long extinct, each edge reflecting faces of those who'd been forgotten by history but remembered by the land. And at its center, light, not blinding, not warm, just true. It did not rise. It revealed a mirror, not of our bodies, of our becomings. We gathered in silence. Root-bound, sky-sent, ground-grown, bloom-born. No hierarchy, no fear, just presence. The mirror did not speak. It showed. Each of us saw a single moment from our lives, the moment when we could have chosen to forget, but chose instead to remember. And in that remembering, the bloom had been born. That was the truth of it all. The bloom didn't start with Loretta. It didn't start with a farm or a well or a rebellion. It started in asterisk all of us. When we refused to forget what mattered. When we looked at the land not as property, but as partner. When we planted grief and watered it with care, not shame. The mirror dimmed. Not as an ending, as a gift. Because we no longer needed to be shown. We were the bloom now. Every step taken became root. Every word spoken in truth became seed. Every act of care became canopy. And Earth herself, no longer wounded and waiting, danced. Not in metaphor. In motion. Continents shifted. Not violently, but in rhythm. Oceans spun in spirals of bioluminescent joy. Creatures once thought extinct returned in forms more brilliant than myth. The heartroot closed its final ring, not shutting out, closing a circle. And in that circle, everything made sense. The loss, the fight, the stubborn, radiant act of Asterisk remembering. The last message written beneath the roots, invisible to eyes but clear to hearts. Read. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. And then the light dimmed, not because it faded, but because it had spread into every hand, every heart, every garden waiting to bloom. And above it all, 2 more great stories waited. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.